Yeah, this is just a quick session really to give an overview of, first of all, what's presented to the national coordinators in terms of how they're supposed to do outreach, and what are the processes, or let's say the stakeholders that they're meant to approach, how we might be able to, let's say, exploit that in some way to increase the engagement, our engagement at the national level in the monitoring process, but I think more generally. And then we'll have some examples that I think are just to give an idea of where, once it gets to the institutionalization of this process, how they are doing that in some places. And it might be part of this homework that we have, which is to try to identify in this template that we'll give you, where and how they do this rollout of this monitoring process, if it's linked to like the VNRs or if it's linked to some other type of institutionalized process at the national level. But first, just to go through, there's two aspects of this, which is one is the multi-stakeholder engagement, and then the other side is the institutionalizing the framework within the country processes. We'll touch on both of these. Basically, they're saying what's the rationale for engaging other stakeholders? I think we know this. We've discussed it in the previous sessions around the reasons for at least engaging in enabling civil society, especially on the enabling environment assessment. But the partnership itself is meant to be multi-stakeholder. So upholding the spirit of the global partnership down to the country level, where it's possible, is obviously something that needs to be attempted, if not, fully implemented. The reasons for this, obviously, to meet the effectiveness principles, obviously on inclusive partnerships for development, but it enhances country ownership, it enhances transparency and mutual accountability, and it is better in terms of delivering long-term results. Here are the different stakeholders that are recognized at the within the GPEDC. So you have obviously the partner countries and development partners, but you have local and regional governments. You have the private sector, you have parliaments, you have multilateral organizations, philanthropy, and really a lot of individual giving, civil society, and trade unions. Important here because, in some places there could be some kinds of alliances or coalitions, I think. Obviously at the level of trade unions, they're often grouped in with the rest of civil society. Philanthropy has proven actually to be quite an interesting ally, especially on the issue of CSO enabling environment, because the conditions that, let's say, small philanthropy faces at the national level is very similar to what CSOs face. And we're not talking, there's often a distinction between what philanthropy is. Often just think of the Gates Foundation and Open Society as these big foundations, but actually, I think in many places it's small individual donors or smaller organizations that have a much more similar sort of remit or perspective as CSOs in terms of their approach to social issues and sort of social justice issues. So that's who's on the cards. And we mentioned this earlier, as national CSO focal points, especially on the enabling environment assessment, you're supposed to engage trade unions and philanthropy. Now, whether or not they'll actually identify their own focal points for you to engage is a separate story, but we've at least in principle agreed to that responsibility. This is a relatively important slide, I would say, because this maps out the whole monitoring process from its 5 phases and determines where, at which point, it's being suggested that CSOs and other non-executives are engaged. We have the inception phase, and on the next slide, we'll show you that they do maintain an up-to-date status of where the rollout of the monitoring process is at a country level. So we'll show you that in a second. But so you have the inception phase, which can take up to 3 months. I think many countries, many of your governments would have already started the inception phase. I assume probably 4 or 5 at least. This is really just kind of setting the basic groundwork for rolling out the monitoring process. The data collection phase, which is the longest phase and where we would want to engage for sure, has several different, that's basically doing the table, if you saw, and completing the annex. And here on the enabling environment assessment is where you will be asked to contribute that input, but hopefully there will be opportunities for you to also engage on the rest of the annex. There is the data review and the final submission. So prior to actually submitting this on their online reporting tool, and for the sort of the global joint support team, the global institutions reviewing it, there's a review. This is one where I think this will have to be your own investigation at country level, whether or not you're able to engage this part and vet the data that they're submitting. I think in some places it might be feasible, in others it probably won't be feasible. The results dissemination, this is where you're now receiving what they've submitted, so you're going to have to review what's been submitted. And then finally, the follow-up, the using the results. And obviously this is the most important part of this whole monitoring exercise. I think what we've found in the past as a reflection is the evidence that's generated by this monitoring exercise hasn't been adequately used and respected in terms of how it drives what especially what donors are doing, but also at country level, what partner country governments are doing. And that is what Luca will get into this a little bit, what they've tried to build into the whole architecture of the global partnership is these action dialogues and the follow-up spaces for addressing these results. So there is this global dashboard that we've referred to. It's a really useful resource if you can figure out how to navigate it. It's a little bit not intuitive, surprisingly. I've tried to explain or feedback to their communications team that they need to improve the user interface, I think is what it's called, or the user experience. Because it's a little bit tricky to find the paths to the information you want, but it's all there some way. So if you have some free time, it's worth looking at this dashboard. On that dashboard, they have things like this. Now, this is really basic, bare bones information, but you see, in the case of Benin, you can go to a country profile, and it gives some general information on the country, where it is, etc. Not where it is, but not geographically where it is, but where it is in terms of its monitoring process. Actually, it might have a map too, but there will be this slide or this image, which shows that Benin is in the inception phase. It's a little bit hard to tell with the way that they formatted it, but the fact that there's a little orange circle that's filled in, that means that's where they're at. If you compare that to Nepal, which is in the data collection phase. Now, this is really rudimentary info, but it at least captures a little bit of where things are, so you can understand and track where they are, where the government is in implementing it. But that's just to show that the actual country profile has quite a bit more information that's worth certainly looking at. And I should mention, we will, after this, in terms of the engagement, I should say this from the outset, we'll just share you the list of national coordinators. We can just copy and paste that and send that to you if you don't know already who that is. For the institutionalization, I think this is more for your info. And again, like I said, in terms of your homework, going back and trying to understand where the process is and how it will be implemented, this is basically where they're suggesting ways that national coordinators can institutionalize the rollout of the GPDC monitoring framework. The reason for this is there's been a lot of feedback from partner country governments that this process, and as you can see, I think you can appreciate now, the survey is dense, and it requires, it's a heavy effort to some degree, especially with all whatever consultation they need to do within their ministries, with other stakeholders, etc. So they've tried to, the feedback has been, well, we need to embed this in existing processes so that this becomes part of something that we're already doing. So whether or not that's the voluntary national reviews, the SDG monitoring, other national processes where they're doing monitoring rollout. So this is basically some demonstrations or illustrations of how that can happen. So this is just some suggestions on how to do that, what the capacities need to be to do that. Some questions around the institutionalization process, which would help integrate into the national processes, is looking at essentially what systems and processes are already there in the country. So I think this is something we would possibly add. We hadn't included this, but this is possibly something to add to this this report back template, whether or not these questions can be answered. The existing data information systems that can already integrate the monitoring results, so processing them a little bit. Which national reports can the GPDC monitoring results feed into? So using the GPDC information to actually support some of the data that national governments need to provide at a national level. How it can be integrated within national strategies and policies that are focused on, I would say, behavior and policy, right? At what point do national governments, decide their strategies for the years forward, the months forward, et cetera? How can this process be integrated into that? And then how the monetary results can foster, are there existing dialogues with multiple stakeholders that this can be integrated into? Here's a couple of examples. We won't go really too into this. There's a few, I think, for colleagues here. It seems like Nepal and Honduras are often referred to in terms of how they are integrating or institutionalizing different aspects of the GPDC monitoring. We'll share these with you later. Won't go into detail. Again, Nepal again. Really, Nepal is one of the darlings of the GPDC, it seems. I don't know if you agree, Bakar, but yeah. So, and Honduras again, and Nepal again. Nepal on every slide. So that's that.